when we announced that we were going to be reading Remember Love back in, I think, October, people were so excited. So many people are such huge fans of yours. And so this is a real privilege and has been the only poetry book that we read, but I think sets such a precedent for how much poetry can speak to people and how relatable your work is.
Thank you. I mean, poetry was certainly my therapy before I could afford a therapist, so I appreciate that.
So I'll just dive into questions if that sounds good to you. And they're a mixture of questions that I have and then questions that people have sent in. And there's often a lot of overlap among questions, so I tried to merge similar questions so that things don't get too redundant. Just to begin, and you talk about how poetry was your therapy before you could afford therapy. In the book, you write about how words have saved you when you've needed saving. And I imagine that this is a concept that's familiar to writers, but perhaps foreign to those who don't write. And I'm curious how you first discovered the power of words and what advice you have for people who are afraid of what words to put down on paper.
Well, there's a reason there. Thank you for your time and for this question. There's a reason that journaling is a time-old craft. There's a reason that The Artist's Way is one of the most sold books of all time, and is used in so often in the recovery community and in the grief community. And I always say that if you're, whether you consider yourself a writer or not, or creative or not, or interested in the arts or not, writing is an incredible way to take what is going on within you, put it on the page so that you can almost have that kind of distance, so that because when something's heavy on your heart or reeling in your mind, your thoughts are kind of fighting over each other, so it's like, oh, she didn't call me back, everyone hates me, or I dropped a message into the all the parents group chat and nobody responded, they all just think I'm the worst mom and nobody wants to play with my kid, or and then you have the other person that's like, no, I'm sure they're all busy, or you have all these, we have a lot of voices going on in our head, and that doesn't make us, there's something that's natural, and that is a very regular thing that goes on. And when we take these narratives and we put them on paper, we really have this ability to see what is real versus what is true. So it's real that you feel insecure, and you can kind of dive into what about this, community exchange, whatever's going on in the moment, these circumstances are triggering something in you, or making you kind of having you bump up against things within you. And you can say, okay, that's real. It's real that I feel this, but is it true? Is it true that I'm a bad parent because, I feel the other parents don't like me? Is it true that I am whatever else it could be, like the guy you like doesn't call you back? Are you unlovable, or is he busy? So when it's on the page, I find that it kind of removes it from the really activated zone within. And I think that's why, there's such an incredible community of journal prompts. Even when we create these gratitude journals, it's actually to make sure that all the thoughts within you aren't bribing you out of the things you have to be grateful for, because we do know that if what is positive or something you're grateful for is acknowledged in your life, it kind of helps you keep an eye out for it. It's like, oh, I'm obsessed with green Volkswagen bugs, and then all of a sudden you see them everywhere, and gratitude flows like that. So when you have a practice of writing about it every day, you have a practice of kind of engaging with it every day. And so writing, when I talk about writing, I don't think that everyone needs to be a writer, or everyone needs to be creative, or everyone needs to be good at anything. But I do think that everyone benefits from being able to see their stories for themselves, in front of them rather than being in the midst of it being within them.
Yeah. And I think, there's no right place to start writing, that any thoughts are valid thoughts to write down. And I think, perhaps in a different capacity, but with my therapy clients, when people, say, what should I start by writing down? What's worth recording? That any thoughts that are written down on paper are valid thoughts and are worth, exploring. And I
And
wonder if,
it's all real. Whether
yeah,
we decide to take it into the next moment with us or not is a decision we get to make.
yeah,
And like anything in life, the more information you have, the better you are at making the next decision. So if I'm booking travel for tomorrow, I'm going to start looking at the prices, and I'm going to look at it versus this day or that day. And, I'm going to try to, instead of just kind of hypothetically in my head being like, okay, I got to leave Tuesday and I don't know the flights and I don't, you know what I mean? And so when you start to just kind of, it's a way of turning what's within into a plan for what you want to do next with what you're going through.
yeah,
And in that, I find the writing to be this very real step in acknowledging what's real so that we can determine our path with intention.
yeah. You talk so much about vulnerability in the book. And I'm
Mhm.
curious, what was the most vulnerable part of writing the book for you about Remember Love specifically?
Well, vulnerability is a really funny word for this book because as I was writing it, I pretty much finished writing this book. And then I interviewed Cheryl Strayed for something. And um, she was telling me a story and she said something. She's like, and that's why we have to be vulnerable. And I was like, you know what? Pause. Can you define vulnerability for me? Because vulnerability, like self-care or healing or self-love, or even shame, like these things get used over and over and over, or I'm sure as uh in your world and in your life, you see all these words become these like really kind of big mainstream worlds, and you're like, okay, every single thing is not gaslighting. Like, and you
Yeah,
have to be able to say that because it isn't something that should be defined by everyone differently and then used at
yeah,
mass. And that happens a lot with, what in the world of mental health tools and
yeah,
spiritual tools and wellness tools. And so I said to her, I was like, I think vulnerability is a word like that. Everyone's like, be vulnerable, be vulnerable. And I said to her, I was like, is vulnerability like I can cry in front of others without shame and knowing that's a good thing? Is it like, is vulnerability the person at the party who's just gonna like start telling you about their like divorce, even though you just met? And, like, what is that? And what's that line between, you know, like dumping or
yeah,
bonding in ways that are, kind of more connected through trauma, or there's a slight manipulation in the bond in those ways, like what or a reach for codependence in the share. And I was like, and what's vulnerability? And she said that vulnerability is when you're being honest about who you are and what you're going through. And I loved that definition so much that I edited pages out of the book to put that conversation into the book,
yeah,
because it was so, it impacted me so much, because then I could even understand where was feeling very vulnerable in my writing for the book. And because a lot of the times vulnerability, when vulnerability is happening, we think it's just fear is happening. So there are things that I was afraid, I mean, there's an entire section of this book on heartbreak, and there were things I wrote about recovering from my own relationships, that I had never said to the person I had the relationship with. Because a lot of it were things that I understood through my own therapy or through time, I kind of, therapeutic conversations with friends or in community with my close girlfriends. And there were things in that section of the book that things I wanted desperately to tell a close friend, like that one friend that couldn't get out of the relationship. And I just wanted to shake her and be like you like deserve better than this. Like, it was, I mean, there, and so that part of the book specifically, what is a kind of parade of unsaid things in my life. And so that was very scary for me. But what it really was, I think, was just a really vulnerable section of the book because
Yeah.
I was being honest about who I am, what I'm going through and what I've gone through. And what's really interesting about writing into or about relationships you've been in, is that you're, you wonder how much of it is your story to tell, how much of it is theirs, how much of the shared experience belongs to you, and I mean, as you also know in your work, that the sharing is important, the bonding is important, the vulnerability is important, the honesty is important, and taking responsibility for yourself is important. So that,
Yeah.
the book has a sense of responsibility and can be a nest for others rather than this kind of like raw nerve of, hi, everyone, please hold my problems, or hold my experiences at a time when you're probably feeling so weighted by your
Yeah.
own. I always try to make sure that the work is an offering and not a weight in that way. And so in that, the editing process was really unique, but yeah.
And I think, and I should have said this at the beginning, you do that so well of not like making it seem like I mean, it's your life and it's your words, but I feel like every single page I read, I could have taken a picture of and sent to someone I knew, and for them to feel like, yes, that completely relates to me. And it's, you have a real gift of writing honestly and openly about yourself, but in a way that people feel heard and understood and comforted. Um, that I think is really beautiful. It's funny, I was looking through my phone and I just have pictures that I took on my phone of different pages and passages to go
Oh.
through. And yeah, it's really beautiful the way you crafted the book.
It was really interesting because, I wanted Remember Love to feel different from Heart Talk because it was for a different part of life than Heart Talk. And or different moments of life. And I remember talking to a friend and saying, it's really interesting that when you want to write more personally, because I mean, Her Talk is a very personal book to me, but I wanted to kind of give a little bit more, Heart Talk doesn't really have passages. And for people who don't know what Heart Talk is, it's my first book from a few years ago. And but Heart Talk doesn't have stories of like I was in the bathtub and I was thinking about this thing or da da da. It doesn't really tell, stories about my postpartum or my childhood or those kind of the kind of there's not as much storytelling from my life in the prose and in the poems. Um and so I said to a friend, I was like, I'm like, I'm worried that I don't want to create this kind of, I'm worried about finding the right line of being more personal than I have ever been, while also really protecting my readers,
Yeah.
because I know that we're all struggling in our different ways in the world, and I want them to know that, I'm being honest and but it feels loving as if, it doesn't, I'm not asking them to love me, I'm offering love to them.
Yeah.
Which is a really, I think, fine line when you're writing anything that has anything to do with your life, is I think a lot of that feels like a request to like, love me, respect me, follow me. And I didn't want it to feel like that. And my friend said, he was like, well, I think it's the best thing you could ever do is like, just try to be whoever you are in a room. And he's like, because like we all know the person at the party who's sucking all the air out of the room. We were just like, ooh, okay, like that was a lot, And he was like, and you're not that person. Like you're the person who's gonna hold a space where like it feels very communal and it feels like everyone can and feel safe to be heard and listen and connect. And so as long as you're just trying to like just be that and keeping in mind who in the room would
Yeah.
just make you feel drained. And I was like, wow, that was a really kind of, it was really helpful at the beginning of writing this book.
When you wrote it, did you write it all as separate pieces and then figure out how to tell the narrative together, or how much of the order of the book was, the sequential order in which you wrote?
The first, and this had never happened to me before with my other books. I guess I would say the title came last. Like Heart Talk was the very last thing that came to Heart Talk was the title.
Yeah.
And same with What the Road Said. We couldn't get the name right for What the Road Said for a while, and same with Where to Begin. We didn't have the titles, but I wrote two books at the same time last year, or I guess starting the summer before into last year. And I wrote May You Love and Be Loved, which was a children's book, and which comes out next month. And I wrote Remember Love. And it was the first time where like I just had this vision for the books. Like I was listening to, for Remember Love, I was listening to a podcast. I was listening to Tara Brach, which I'm sure your community knows and loves because she's the best thing. And I've listened to her since I was like 20. And I'm listening and I'm listening, and I was kind of in the haze of postpartum with my second kid, I think. And she's saying something, and then I just hear her say "Remember Love" and kind of in passing in the sentence. And I think it was I was in postpartum. I was in the midst of kind of postpartum depression with Bayou and my second kid. And in that you kind of feel a little like my energy was so low that I was like, oh, I have like no will or desire to write, because I'd written my first kid's book and put it out while I was pregnant with her. And I had crammed a lot into the period when I was pregnant with her and put my postpartum with Memphis. So I was kind of like, I have no energy to write anything. I don't know what it could be. I'd told everyone I don't want to write anything. But then I heard those words and I cleared a board, because I usually work on a push pin board. And I cleared a board and I put a post at the top that said "Remember Love." And over the next few months, and I didn't tell anyone I had it. I didn't, tell my book agent or anyone like that. And I was like, I just started putting ideas that like went to Remember Love as this kind of lifeline, like connecting me back to a connective experience on Earth. So I started with this idea of like, what happens when you feel really, really lost? Like, how do you, like, where is the line that gets you back to feeling connected to the Earth so you can plant your feet and start finding your way home? Like, what is that what are the feelings there? What are the thoughts? And then I really thought a lot about, that in one of my favorite sections of the book is called Worthy Rebellions. And it was this kind of like, what happens when you feel like there's this inner part of you that knows that the way the world is asking you to be does not serve you? Like, how do you rebel against this age of everyone trying to turn you into a machine and no one allowing you to be a flower? Like, how do you like know to want that for yourself? And then the most asked question I've ever, I don't think a day goes by where I don't get an email or a message online or in person, wherever I am, where someone doesn't ask me about heartbreak. And I've always wanted to write it. And at first I thought like, maybe I'll write a book that was just on getting through heartbreak. But as I started even writing about heartbreak, or I was like, maybe it'll be in two parts and it'll mostly be heartbreak. But I felt that this idea that we have a worthy rebellion and we eventually get there, and this claiming of the self and claiming of the life we want just kind of like emphasized like the strength you need to get through heartbreak, and it all needed to be together. And the part 4, which is called "And Then We Let Go," I wasn't going to write. And then when I was pretty much done with the book, I had this very freak thing happen, which is the power. I live in a canyon in Los Angeles, and the power went out, and it wasn't that my file wasn't saved, but it glitched. It like kind of cracked my Word file when the power went out, and I lost like half the document. And someone was able to recover it in literal, like kind of gibberish, where I could kind of trace the words through and see kind of like, oh, I wrote something about that, or I wrote something at that. But ultimately I had to start over while being pretty much, maybe 80% finished. And on my original board, I'd always had this kind of thing about letting go and release and acceptance. And then that was kind of always the fourth thing. And I don't know, as I was writing it, I don't know if I just got a little fatigued by writing the rest of the book, that I was like, I'm not going to write that section, but it turns out that like, I actually needed that glitch to like remind me that the book needed to end with acceptance and the weird things happening, saying it's okay and letting it go and starting fresh and starting over. And that kind of, so they were all written in their own kind of separate spaces and moments. And there were some that I felt like could go in Worthy Rebellions or could have been in Heartbreak. And so there was some switching around in the end. But yeah.
It's interesting what you say about, the most common question you get is about heartbreak, because I've had several people contact me and say, I just went through a breakup, or I'm going through heartbreak. What book do you recommend? And we've read several wonderful books about relationships and, moving on from relationships. And every single time, Remember Love is either the book or like one of two books that I recommend, because I think
Wow.
it so speaks to people.
Thank you
You know,
so much.
you begin the book with like really a breathtaking poem about self-love. And one of the quotes from it says, self-love is often spoken about like a battle. We either win or we lose, but it manifests more as a bird in flight, and it's minute to minute. There are moments we glide through the sky, riding the wind with ease, and there are moments we must exhaust our wings to survive the elements. And when I read this poem, I sent it to several people, all of whom could relate. But I sometimes think, and it's interesting because you were talking about these phrases earlier that kind of get used so often, and perhaps they lose their meaning, or there's not a uniform definition of what they are. And I sometimes feel like self-love is one of those
Big time. Big time.
terms. And I'm curious from your perspective how you would describe the difference between self-love and self-acceptance, and how should people know which one of those they're striving for?
Well, I think that if you can, I reference in this book and in my personal life, I talk about this a lot, is, Bell Hooks basically spent her whole life telling us to define love for ourselves. So if you can find and create the kind of elements of love, whether that is, because what I would say is that acceptance is in love, right? So I don't think you can love yourself without accepting yourself. So I would kind of put it under that umbrella. I don't think you can love yourself without respecting yourself. I think that these are all ways in which we, work and what we have to acknowledge, that the world is not built for those to flow.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have to be in a constant relationship with acceptance, self-respect, self-nourishment, caring for ourselves, monitoring how we speak to ourselves. And, I think when it comes to, I think in self-acceptance, I find that self-acceptance is this is kind of our ability to say, okay. And self-love is our ability to say, and I love you.
Yeah.
Do you know? So it's like something, oh, worst thought ever about myself. Okay. It's okay. And then I think that if you think about how I would say this to my 4-year-old, if she made a mistake or spilled something all over the carpet, and it upset her, right? Because she felt that she did something that made her feel bad or wrong, or that she, was being imperfect. I would say to her, it's okay. We accept what just happened. It's okay. It is okay. And I love you, and let's get it. Let's make the next step. And so I think that, the love as a verb is also something that is like leading us to the next moment of okayness. Like acceptance is like whatever's happening right now is okay. And then love is going to then say, all right, and let's bridge this towards like the next generous act towards ourselves, which is like, okay, let's pick it up. Like, let's get up again. Let's read this book or call this person or make this tea or like kind of get in our bodies again. And like, love is the thing that will help you to kind of keep going.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. So self-acceptance is needed for self-love to be there, but self-love is what kind of helps not someone move on, but move on no,
It's an action word, you know, it's breathing, it's flying, it's moving with you. And I think that there's a lot of elements of loving yourself, just like there's a lot that goes into loving another person, patience. I mean, that's why love has its definitions, even in the Bible, where it's like, love is patient, love is kind, you know, in every kind of spiritual text or ancient text, they're going to talk about the qualities of what, you know, makes love, you know, love something that is uh happening now. And so in it, I'd say that if I am um in a moment of beating up on myself or being down on myself, I actually can't get out of it until I'm accepting my circumstances and that I'm doing that. You know, I
yeah,
have to be able to acknowledge these things. And I would say that that is, you know, kind of taking a step on the way to somewhere else. And I think that love is constantly trying to bring us home to ourselves, to a place where no matter who we are or what we go through, we are deserving of feeling okay with that.
yeah. And I think perhaps related to that, several book club members wrote about how much they related to the idea about it's hard to love a stranger. It's extra hard when the change has turned the stranger into you. And one person several people wrote in about this, and I chose what one person wrote, which was a few years ago. I was in an emotionally abusive relationship, and I'm now getting through postpartum depression. In both cases, I felt recognizable. What are ways amidst change or uncontrollable circumstances that we can stay in touch with who we are or get to know ourselves again, as you say, to avoid feeling like a stranger?
Well, one thing that is important is to not try to avoid the unavoidable. We are, you know, there's another line in the book that says our bodies and the life that runs through them are seasonal. You know, there are moments, and I don't mean that as in like the winter of your life is when you're a certain age. You have winters in your year, you know, you have moments where like, gosh, you just wish summer would last forever because it feels so great and you're in the sun and the sea salt and the wind and the temperature's just right. And you have moments of spring when everything feels like new and curious, and fall where you're feeling cozy and hibernating. And you have winters where you feel really isolated and bare and disconnected and wanting and needing another season of life to feel vibrant again. And so I think acknowledging that like we are so near to these, you know, the kind of natural flow that surrounds us. And for me, I know that kind of being able to step into that is always helpful. So, you know, whether it's when I have felt at my most disconnected to self, and I've been lucky enough to um hit the point, because you don't start at the point of knowing you're disconnected. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
you're kind of funky and you're kind of weird and you haven't called these friends in a while and you keep skipping this thing, or you're spending a longer time in the tub, or you like don't want to get up in the mornings, or you're not like you don't feel engaged in your relation, you know, the kind of symptoms start flowing before you're able to identify that's happening. I have found.
Yeah.
um and so I think once you get to the point where you're like, whoa, I'm disconnected, um, you can start asking yourself, well, what would I do if I wanted to connect with somebody else? Perhaps I'd go on a walk with them. Perhaps I'd listen to them. So maybe when I'm on my walk, I should listen to what I'm thinking. I'd move slowly. I'd maybe make them a nice lunch. You know, maybe I would, you know, kind of like start with this kind of sensory experience of like dropping into my body. Perhaps I would stretch, perhaps I would notice my breath. I think that there's little things you can do, because the more you can hear yourself, the more you can hear what you need, you know. It's and then you start having different conversations with your therapist, you start having different conversations with your friends, and you start the shift, you know. You don't.
Pop culture and stuff like that, that people feel like it's all around them and they need to have a view. And it's I think often people are formulating opinions these days about things that either they're not informed about, or like you said, like they don't even really
You
care
don't
about,
even
but they feel
care.
like they
You
just
don't
have
care.
to
You're
say.
not interested. But I think this constant hope from our
Yeah,
culture to opine has created a real rattle within us where we can't stop having opinions about this and ourselves. Do you know? And
yeah,
we can't stop thinking that like it matters how we look when we go to the grocery store,
yeah,
or it matters. I mean, I can't believe that we entered into a culture where people don't want to wear the same dress that is expensive twice. Like the
yeah,
idea that you have worn a dress to a one wedding and you now, but because it was in one person's photo on Instagram, you never want to wear the dress again.
yeah,
So that is overthinking something in our lives. Like that is a worthy rebellion, because why do we even think anyone else is overthinking what we wear like that? Do
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, and
yeah,
that's when you're like, self-care is not thinking about yourself so much.
yeah. And I mean, it's funny, I have to admit that I fall prey to it. My brother got married a few weeks ago and I was obsessing over what dress to wear. And my mom made a comment about, well, find a dress that you love and you'll want to wear, to future weddings. And I said, you think I'm gonna wear the same dress like after I've been photographed in it? And I think it also like gives
Yeah.
a sense of self-importance to ourselves, that not that we don't deserve, but it's like no one is as concerned, no one is going to notice. It's
And by the way, that's what I tell my friends who have that kind of anticipatory anxiety about entering a social space, especially in Los Angeles. I'm like, trust me when I tell you no one's thinking about you.
yeah,
Like you're just thinking about themselves. Like, and
yeah,
I don't care who you are in the room. They're only thinking about themselves being in front of you, even if you're the most important person there. So if you're just like everybody else, then they're certainly not thinking about you. Like we are very consumed with our own experiences.
yeah,
And I think that there's ways where we can free ourselves, and it's a really worthy rebellion to say, like, I actually am freeing myself from not overthinking adorning myself, right? Like we have, especially as women, we have been adorning ourselves for years as a way to delight in our bodies and our
yeah,
femininity and our sexuality, and all of that is so valid and so real. I get dressed up all the time and I really love it. And I watch my daughters without even like any type of prompt want to put on 30 princess dresses all day long. So there's something in us that enjoys that.
yeah,
And more and more I'm like, it's not that it's a very helpful mantra is it's not that deep. And having the inner boundary where I'm not going to burden myself with too many thoughts about somebody wearing a dress I've worn before is important.
yeah. It's an important reminder. I, and I want to get to some of the questions. I'm mindful of time and want to get to some of other questions people wrote in about. But I think one thing that I think about often is this idea. Well, let me tell you what I'm going to reference first. So I read your poem, How It Goes, when I was in the midst of deeply grieving the death of one of my cousins who had recently passed away from cancer. And it gave me a lot of solace. And I often tell people and think to myself that perhaps the most beautiful thing about humans is how resilient we are. And I think often people feel the pressure to move on or get over their pain, whether it be grief or trauma or heartbreak. Um, and I often think of it as those are things that we don't move on from, but we move on with. And I
Yeah.
think people often don't realize that you can find beauty while still healing, that sometimes, there is no moving on. And I'm curious what you have to say to people who want to see the beauty again, but don't know if and when the metaphorical rain will stop pouring down.
Um, I mean, I'm so sorry for your loss. It's so hard. And I think that we we live with these horrible things. And something that I think is also a worthy rebellion is this culture of get over it. Like you
Yeah.
don't get over loss, and you don't get over the worst thing ever. And you don't get over, that feeling you have when you know your phone is never going to ring again and it be their name. That's
Yeah.
just not, you don't get over that. And
Yeah.
we have, and loving ourselves where we are is accepting that you don't get over it. Recently I've been talking about grief a lot lately. Right before, and this is kind of what I'm part of, um it my I know that when we were trying to schedule this, my scheduling got really
Yeah.
intense. And part of why that happened was because a few weeks before my book came out, my very best friend's dad abruptly passed in the middle of the night in Washington, D.C. I happened to be there when it happened, and so I stayed there for the kind of weeks leading into my book tour. And so I didn't really make it home. And I, I've been with her as she's been moving through this incredible loss. And I was saying to someone recently that what has so what has left me in such awe of her, of being her witness, is that everything is awful, and she is actively doing a lot of things for herself, that like she's running, and she took the artist way and kind of journals and keeps her schedule in it so that she has to look to it all day, and it reminds her to write in it. And she's just doing all these different, and she's really focusing on how she's eating, and she's doing all these things not to numb or escape, but it's almost as if she's building a house, because the way her life is scheduled, it's such a rich existence. It's not
Yeah.
psycho and regimented and scary. It's like, wow, what a beautiful life. And what's driving you is, so it's like you're building this structure for joy to come in the day joy does come.
Yeah.
And I do think that something, when we're ready in high grief, we can start to just do a little thing for ourselves every day, not to necessarily feel joy. And maybe you will feel joy. And if you do, I do think you deserve, even in the worst time of your life, to hold on to it. And like Mary Oliver says, joy is not meant to be a crumb. And I do think that that is important. But if it's not there, I do think, and what I have noticed very recently in Diara's experience is, wow, like this is a home for joy. And I know that joy is not there. And I know that, like, just laughing and like, this lively living is not quite there. And I guess, it's still metaphorically raining, but she's like building a structure for like the day the sun comes out. And I have found that that has been so helpful to her, and has also helped kind of create these kind of structures and organizing principles so that she can keep living in her grief. And I think that's the hardest part about grief, is that grief often really wants to paralyze us in either like do not move or do not live, or and it does. And I think nobody escapes that for a small period of time, or do the things where we ignore that life is happening because the horrible thing is happening. And so finding that she's engaging with life, not to just say like, I'm doing this so I'll be happy. It's like, no, I'm doing this because, if here's my lighthouse,
Yeah.
if joy and somebody's going through the streets, or all, their boats are all in the sea looking for me, like they can find me because I'm building my lighthouse. And that, I think, has been
Yeah.
something I've really learned in the last, 6 months.
Yeah. No, I think it's a beautiful lesson, and I think it's so important, like setting the foundation for when you are able to find the joy again. And I think in talking about grief and, feeling it with myself, whether, it be with the passing of loved ones, or, heartbreak in the past, is, but I think especially with grief and death, like feeling guilt when you do feel those moments of joy. And I think, grief with so many other things in life is not linear. It's it's fluid, it's confusing, it's unpredictable, it's ever changing. And
Again,
that
you
one
think
second, yeah,
you think you're doing well, or you're making way somewhere, as if you're getting further and further from it. And then you hit a day where you're completely and utterly overwhelmed by it. And I think that one of the hardest things, and I talked to a grief counselor recently about this, I interviewed her for something, and she was saying that I was asking her, like, what should friends do for someone who's in grief? And she's like, allow wherever they are to be okay, and don't make
yeah,
them feel that, like, oh my God, you're doing great. No one needs to feel that they're doing great. They're living differently, and life is different.
yeah. Um, Perhaps a different type of heartbreak. Someone, a book club member wrote in and said, in your piece about leaving the love during friendship breakups, how
Mhm.
do you reconcile, how do you reconcile this if someone did wrong to you? I want to give former friends the benefit of the doubt, but is there risk that holding on to the love with a friendship invalidates your own emotions?
When I say holding on to the love, we can have, I think a lot of the times, because love isn't it often when shared with others is an attaching force. So you
Yeah,
can love, but you can love something or someone without attaching, and you can love somebody, or have love for someone, without having a relationship with them. And so, love, relationships are conditional, while love can be unconditional, in the sense of, like, you just can't help how you feel about someone, and that you really care a lot about their precious little existence on earth, and have these beautiful memories you shared, and you value that, when those memories felt really great. And every relationship is a contract and has terms in a way, and we have to, we have times where we have to renegotiate them and understand, how we need to be seen or heard or spoken to or in relationship with, in order for the relationship to continue on. And if you can't agree on those terms, then the term you agree on is to part ways. And it's painful and it's very hard. And so when I say to leave the love, I don't mean keep the relationship, because you love them. And I think that might be the distinction that's important, because I wrote about this in the book. I've had my own friendship breakups, if you will, and the because I kept my, kind of caring, sweet, loving feelings towards them, 10 and 12 years later, when, maybe the kind of, like, drama or conflict, which inevitably melts, which it always does, uh, there was a lot of room to, like, kind of reconnect in, the kind of sisterhood of our childhood relationship.
yeah,
And there was a lot of, like, growth and accountability and difference and, dynamic that made it possible for us to be friends as adults. And that was cool. And, you have periods of, like, pause with people too. I was just saying that it's like, it happens with your parents and it happens with your siblings, where it's like, a friend of mine just said this the other day. She's like, oh no, I have my mom on pause again, because she just, like, our dynamic is, like, so outdated that sometimes it flares in such an intense way that, like, it is only through distance that, like, I can reconnect to the boundaries I need to have with her, in order to feel, like, protected from, the ways in which I know she can behave that don't serve me, while still being able to have the relationship. And having them on pause is still a relationship. It's just that is just the depth of the boundary at that time.
yeah, yeah.
And so I think that happens with friends, and you leave the love, you still love your mother, and you still love your father or your brother or your, and but you have these moments where you're reflecting and you're figuring it out. And I think that happens with friends, and that's what I mean when I say leave the love.
It's interesting because I think if I like when I think back on the past 2 years of the book club and the books that we've read, um, one of the most common themes that has come up is something that came up in Remember Love. And you pose a question about at what point consideration turns into the type of accommodation that erases us in relationships. And this also reminds me of the metaphor in the book about glue, that really resonated with me and I think several other people. You know, about a year and a half ago, we had a book club meeting in which we discussed a term called high functioning codependency, which is, are you familiar with that idea? And then last fall, we also discussed that compassion can't exist without boundaries. And it sounds like you and I definitely have too, have walked this fine line between being overly accommodating, which I think is a behavior that often receives praise from society, especially among women, of being people pleasers, of being there for other people, of living to make other people happy. How how can someone recognize this erasure in relationships while they're still in it? And what do you suggest for people who want to make this change away from being too accommodating, while also perhaps fearing the reactions of those around them who are so accustomed to their being this way?
So anyone who does this knows they do this because inevitably you have a day where everyone's on your nerves and you're like, how is every single person in my life on my last fucking nerve? You know, like you're just like, and you, if you can trace it, you know, and allow that, you know, investigation into the self, which is so divine and of such great value and is such an amazing way to show yourself love, to
Yeah,
constantly investigate your own behavior so that if you are blowing your top, you can investigate what is the pathway of yeses and nos and or nos that got me here. And were there no nos? Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? Like, was there a period, well, you know, was there not a single no all day, all week, or all month? Was it whatever you guys want all day, or like, oh no, I'll eat whatever, or oh no, you take the last one. Was there, and you know, I so deeply feel that no one will give you anything that is truly healing and honoring of yourself. You have to claim it from the world. So the thing is, like, nobody is going to give a people pleaser a, you know, experience, or they don't have to people please. If
yeah,
you want to claim like space in your relationship or your own needs or your own wants and have those honored by other people, you know, I don't care how loving of a person you meet or how great your parents are or whatever, a dynamic is a dynamic. And where you find that other people are valuing you, and I write in the book how that kind of behavior of, you know, being so considerate that I erase myself, you know, it started in my childhood. It started with, you know, my noticing that, like, if, and I see it in my own kids today, you know, everyone can tell when someone else is pleased with them. And if you're listening, if you're this, if you're, you know, so many women hear good girl or don't cry or this or that, you know, you can start to feel where you're like, and you start to think that someone being pleased with you or them or making their day easier because you listened, is love, and that's not love. And that's why it's so important that when your kids are being rowdy or breaking the rules or doing all the things that, you know, kids should and need to do to experiment with what happens in life, that they're reminded that you love them all the time.
yeah,
And unfortunately, that's just not a fundamental part of parenting. But it's I cleaned up everything and everything was just right. And you're like, oh, I love you so much. That was amazing. Do you know? And
yeah,
so I think that in that, you know, we have different ways that we need to start raising our kids, because that is really where it starts. And then I think when you're having the day where you're overwhelmed by all, you know, like too many yeses in a row, start to ask yourself how you can start to claim space for your no or the yes you actually want. And remember that and again, like, I think, you know, my partner, Simon, loves me so much. I really do. I don't ever doubt how much he loves me. And I do not think that Simon in a million years wants, like, is sitting here thinking like that I want to give you space to claim the temperature of our bedroom. Do you know what I mean? Or
Right.
whatever it is, like, because I
Yeah.
think he wants what he wants, and you can't blame people for what they want, and he's not, doesn't care that I like have to put a bathrobe on and like, whatever it is. And so I, I do, so if I, if you have to make it, and that's obviously a very small
Yeah.
thing, but I think, or if you said yes and gave that person your last airline miles or your whatever, and then you're like, but I really wanted them for my thing and you didn't do it. It's like, there are these things, and I don't care how much your brother loves you. If he wants your damn airline miles, he's gonna ask you for the airline miles. Like, and you have to be like, no. And I think those are knowing that no one in your life, even the people who truly love you so much, are gonna give that to you is critical. So what is your process of claiming the space, wants, needs, and desires you deserve, because you can hear yourself wanting them, which means they're valid and they're important and they're real.
Yeah. And I'm mindful of looks like it just gave another warning. So maybe I'll squeeze in one quick
Sure.
question if you're okay with that. Which is just that you speak a lot about how people don't know how to relax, and you say that we shouldn't have to break down in order to pour into ourselves. And I, see it all the time, whether it be with family members, friends, clients, of saying, "How are you?" And people say, "Oh, I'm so busy." And it feels like that, like, that has replaced the good things. How are you?
It's busy and tired. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
so tired and so
Yeah.
exhausted.
And, you say, and I completely agree that often people feel the need to be busy to avoid facing their feelings. And um, where do you think this need to be busy all the time came from? And how can we move away from this avoidance of feeling our feelings?
Well, I mean, we do truly live in what we have coined a hustle and grind culture. So, at the end of the day, from a very primal place, we're wanting love and acceptance. And so we're, for the same reason we want a new dress, because maybe that gives us, there's a deeper desire to say, I'm more lovable in a new dress.
Yeah.
I'm more lovable if I'm hustling and working and exhausted. I'm more desirable. I'm more lovable if I have, accomplished so many things. And am I allowed to wake up in the morning, have done nothing yet, and love myself, is the biggest question you can.
Yeah.
And that is
Yeah.
a truly, like, that is the ultimate worthy rebellion. Like, I just opened my eyes. That's all I've done yet today. Do I get to start this day being like, just being completely covered in love for myself and being worthy and being of value, without having done anything? Um, I've definitely, I don't say that because I do that every day. I'm someone
Right.
who's struggled with severe periods of burnout. That's more of note to me, because in periods of reflection after deep periods of burnout, I've, as I started trying to walk myself home to myself, I was like, that feels right. It feels right to say, God, I don't need to earn my own love, especially at a low point.
Yeah.
Um, and so I actually need, when I need my love the most, that's when I'm the most withholding, which is really annoying. And so I think that this idea that we can, not have to, I think there's a poem in the book that says, can I love myself, without the kind of the gold medal around my neck? Can I
Yeah.
love myself? It's like, do I need to have won a race or even been in a race to love myself, or could I just be walking amongst the trees and love myself,
Yeah. I mean, it's, we live in such a culture that I think it's hard, but like my best friend, for example, said to me today, like, "What are you doing for yourself today?" And I said, "Oh, I have a research meeting and I'm seeing 8 clients and I have this book discussion." She's like, "No, no, no. What are you doing for yourself?" And I think it's important to realize, especially I think as we have all these metrics for how successful we are, how much we're accomplishing, how efficient we are, to take the measurements of the small things we're doing for ourselves and seeing those as worthy accomplishments, in addition of looking at the big things that get recognized by other people.
Yeah, and the easiest, most kind of practical way to do that is probably by creating a 3-minute way of
Yeah.
doing something for yourself, a 5-minute, a full day. Because I think a lot of the times we think that, like, okay, I get to do it on a Sunday, and then We have, like we've coined like a self-care Sunday, and then we end up doing a bunch of stuff we don't even want to do. Do you know?
Yeah.
And so it was like I have to get all of my wisdom teeth out on Wednesday, and I'm dreading it. And so my week today and tomorrow are kind of packed, since I'm sure I'll just be like
Yeah.
in my basement on painkillers watching like rom-coms for a week. And so I was like, and my yoga person was like, okay, why don't we do yoga before? And I put it in my calendar and I was like, no. Like I canceled an hour later because the thing that even should be self-care just felt like, you know what, that's like an extra hour I could have to myself to think or process or get ready to just kind of be under the weather, or like not be with my kids as actively as
Yeah.
I usually am. And I think that, those check-ins with yourself, to start with what feels good, and then being like, okay, what are ways that I could look at my calendar once a day and be like, even this thing I think I'm doing for self-care, does it feel good? And
Yeah.
would a 20-minute walk actually be like, a fifth the time of that, and give you back twice as much?
Yeah.
And so I think that really looking, following what feels good instead of what's right, or it's giving you like kind of two things at once, because it's yoga because it's self-care, and it's exercise. So I think that leaving that efficiency mindset is important, because once again, it reminds us that, we're kind of much more similar to the tree in our backyard than we are to this like phone that is like
Yeah.
crashing and breaking and glitching in our hands all day.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know members of the book club are going to be so excited to watch this back. And thank you for doing this on the week that you're getting your wisdom teeth removed. And
Gosh,
I'm,
no, thank
sure
you.
is so
Thank you
packed.
for your patience. I really appreciate it. I know this conversation was a long time coming, and it was so much kind of scheduling and rescheduling. And I'm really thankful that you were so kind and patient with us.
Thank you. And do you have any upcoming projects? I mean, I Remember Love just came out, but anything that people can be looking forward to?
May 11 Be Loved comes out in May, which feels like so long from now, but I don't know. And then all of a sudden it'll just be May. So and I'm really excited about it. It's a kid's book I wrote, that it's called May You Love and Be Loved: Wishes for Your Life. And it's kind of everything I hope people can have for themselves in this world. And it's exciting because I illustrated this book myself. And so it's very, I don't know, I think I'm going through some kind of, I want everything to feel very personal right now. I think maybe it's just in a world where everything's gotten so kind of glossed over online and everywhere else, that having these kind of handmade, really deeply felt things you can hold just feels so nice. So I'm excited, and thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. Your work is beautiful, and I and so many other people, as I'm sure you know, are such huge fans of yours. So good luck with the surgery on Wednesday.
Oh
And
my
thank you again.
God, can you believe it? I can't believe it. I can't believe I still have them all, but I have held
Me
on.
neither. Yeah,
I know.
yeah,
No, but my brother and I are both very late. He just got his out like 6 months ago, and now I'm doing mine.
that's where you get all your wisdom from.
I know. What if there's nothing left when the teeth are gone?
Um,
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.